On your credit card statement, guys, it tells you how long it's going to take you to pay off that debt. And it's a very long time if you make only those minimum payments. So you've got to throw money at that debt. And that's what I did. Hello, friends, and welcome back. Welcome to my finance series. I'm super excited to kick this off for the month of February. I've been really focused on making sure I set the foundation for this channel, which is God. And I want to build on that. You know, the Bible goes into a lot of detail about how we can be good stewards of our money, good managers of our money, how we can invest in God's kingdom, how we can use our money to help others, and how we should use our money wisely. And so I wanted to kick off this series talking about how I got out of debt. I want to start this video by sharing that I know times are tough. I personally graduated during a really bad recession. I was not able to find like a big girl job for over 2 years, about 2.5 years. And I had to get really creative. I graduated with $30,000 in student loan debt and had no way, no means in which to pay it. So, for those of you out there that are struggling right now, maybe you're struggling to find a job, you can't even think about how you're going to pay off your debt right now. I have been in your shoes literally. So I just want to start by saying I know times are hard. And for some of us, the idea of paying off our debt just seems impossible. But I'm here to tell you with God, all things are possible, literally. I went from not having a job for 2.5 years after graduating college with all this student loan debt to being able to pay off all 30,000 of that student loan debt before I turned 30. So I just want you to know it is possible. God is amazing. He can make up for lost time. And so I hope that that encourages you as we get into some details on how I approach paying off my debt and how I'd encourage you to do the same. Proverbs 22:7, it reads, "The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is the slave of the lender." I'm sure we can all relate to that verse in some regard. When you are in debt, you do feel like this shackle on you, right? Of just like, ooh, every month that bill comes and I've got to pay it. And if I don't, there's going to be consequences. A late fee, they could repossess something. And it's just, it creates a lot of stress and a lot of unnecessary stress. And that's not fun to be stressed about not being able to pay your bills and not being able to meet your needs. And so, I wanted to start off with that verse just to encourage us and hopefully motivate us to get out of debt once and for all. It's not easy. I'm just, disclaimer, it's not going to be easy. It requires a lot of discipline and a lot of sacrifice, but it is possible and it is so rewarding to finally feel that weight of debt lifted off of you and be able to just feel financially free. Now you can go buy things and go do things without worrying about interest and fees and paying someone back. So, I have 3 tips that I'm going to share with you today about practical ways that you can go about getting out of debt. It doesn't matter whether you make a lot or a little, there are still ways that you can kind of tackle your debt effectively. So, how did I go about sort of paying off my debt? Number one, you have to assess your debt. Whether it's credit card debt, student loans, a car payment, whatever type of debt you have, the first step is to sort of list everything out. How much do I owe? What is my balance? What are my minimum payments? What are the current interest rates? I feel like sometimes we get so used to reaching for that credit card that we don't even realize how much debt we've accumulated until it's out of control. And that can make us feel even more stressed out. And so I encourage you, step one, do it now, do it today. Just line up that debt and assess, what am I actually working with? Step number two that I would suggest is lower your expenses. Now that you know how much debt you're working with, you need to free up room in your budget to actually be able to pay on this debt. The minimum payments just aren't going to do it. And so you're going to have to figure out a way to make room to pay your debts. The two most expensive things that we often pay for are shelter and cars, right? So if you have a mortgage or if you have rent, we need to think of creative ways to sort of lower those expenses. And so there's a couple of different ways we can approach that. Some practical ways that we can go about lowering our mortgage expense include getting a roommate, getting multiple roommates, and in some cases moving in with family or friends. That is the approach I took. I literally didn't have a job after college, so I didn't really have a choice. I had all these plans about getting my own apartment after college, but it just wasn't God's plan. And so I moved home. I moved home for those 2.5 years that I didn't have a job, which allowed me not to really have any expenses in the form of rent or mortgage. But even after I did finally land that first job, I stayed home. That's an encouragement I have for people. If it's just 6 months or a year, give yourself a head start and move home for a little while. Now, I understand for some of us that's just not possible. Whether your family lives out of state, out of the country, whether you just don't have that dynamic that you can live with your family because of relational problems, or, maybe they don't have room for you. There are still other ways, creative ways you can find a way to share that expense of housing. Like I said, you can find a roommate, you can find multiple roommates. Maybe there's a cousin or a sibling that you can live with. I highly encourage you guys. I know it's fun to live on your own or to have your own place, but if the money is not there and the debt is, you got to make that sacrifice. The other thing is your car. That's the other big expense of ours, is a car payment. If you currently have a car payment or a large car payment, you might want to look into refinancing, or you might want to look into just getting another car that's maybe more affordable. I've always been a Toyota Corolla girl myself. I'm real practical when it comes to cars. Would I love a Tesla or some other fancy BMW type of car one day? Sure. If that's God's will for my life, why not? But if I can't afford it, which I cannot, I go the practical route. So find a car you can afford. If those car payments are killing you, you got to find a way to get a lower car payment, whether that's turning in that car and finding something cheaper. Maybe it's sharing a car with someone for a while. There was a period of time I didn't have a car. I didn't have a car during college. And so I took public transportation, and I, hitched ride with friends. It's not fun. I'm not going to lie, it's not fun. But again, sometimes it's necessary for a season. While we pay down the debt, we've got to be willing to make sacrifices. My tip number three for these dogs. My tip number three for paying off debt is make a plan. So, in step one, you've assessed your debt and you've listed out all your debts. So, now what are we going to tackle first? You kind of have to look at paying off debt like a fun competition, if you will, or a fun game where it takes strategy and agility to figure out how you're going to overcome, how you're going to climb this mountain that is your debt so that you can reach the other side and be debt free. So make a plan, list out all your expenses, and decide what you want to tackle first. Most people would advise you to tackle the debt with the highest interest rate first. So, again, if you have three credit cards and one is at 10% and one is at 15% and one is at 20%, you're going to want to probably pay off the one that's at 20% interest first, because that's going to save you money in the long term. Ultimately, it's up to you how you tackle debt. I've heard other approaches where some people like to go off the smallest debt first, the whole debt snowball concept that Dave Ramsey sometimes talks about. That's another approach. I'm not here to tell you how to do it. I'm just here to tell you to do it. Make a plan. Make short term goals where, again, maybe you're paying off one credit card in the next 6 months, and make long term goals where I'm going to pay off all my credit cards within the year 2025. But you have to have a plan. If you don't make a plan, you sort of plan to fail, as the saying goes. So make a plan. The last tip I'll give you is you need some accountability. Get accountable. You can make this plan and you can have this plan up on your wall and do all the things, but you actually have to put the plan into action. So I guess tip number four is put your plan into action. And sometimes for us, that requires accountability. So, again, if we're talking about lowering our expenses this month and really trying to make sure we free up money to pay debt, you might need to share your plan with someone so that they can help hold you accountable, right? Like, get some accountability, get an accountability buddy. If you need one, I can be your accountability buddy. I'm a very strict accountability buddy, I'll say. But yes, get some accountability. You got to carry out your plan in order to succeed. And I know that you can do it. And again, you guys, you can start small. That can be very overwhelming, especially when you have a lot of debt and you owe a lot of different people. But start small. Even just adding another 20, 50, $100 per month allocated towards paying down debt is going to make a huge difference and a huge dent in your debt. So, back to me and how I paid off my debt in that time. I literally followed these tips, guys. Like I mentioned, I graduated college and I was not able to find sort of a corporate job in line with like the degree I got. And so I tried to find creative ways to make myself more marketable by going back to school and taking courses. I went back to junior college because I didn't want to spend a bunch more money getting into more debt. So that was my personal choice. But I also worked odd jobs. You know, I worked whatever job came my way. I was a telemarketer, I worked retail, I worked as an assistant. I did whatever job sort of came my way, and none of them honestly last very long. But it was enough to sort of get me started and get me just enough experience to eventually, 2.5 years later, finally get my first sort of corporate job. And that is when I was ultimately able to make really big progress on my debt. I assessed all my debts, student loans, credit cards, I lined it all up. Then I did step number two. I lowered my expenses. In this case, like I mentioned, I was already living at home, so that saved me a lot. But I also, made sure I drove an economic car. I tried not to spend as much on eating out and things that, eat up our money quickly. So I made sure that I freed up room in my budget to make sure that I can focus a lot of my money on my debt. And then step number three, I made a plan. I listed out how much debt I had. I looked at how much money I could afford to allocate to paying off that debt. And every month, consistently, I made those payments. So you've got to throw money at that debt. And that's what I did. I actually paid my debt as if I was paying rent in my home. Because I know some of you are like, oh, well, she didn't have rent. So, duh, she was able to pay it. I acted like I was paying rent, guys. I paid 800, 900, sometimes $1,000 I was throwing at my debt each month. Right. And what that allowed me to do is pay down my debt in just a few years. And it was so liberating because when I did finally get to move out and get my own place, I didn't also have this debt hanging over me. I had already gotten used to paying, large sums of money towards my debt, where now I was just refocusing that money over to a rent. So it also got me in the habit of getting used to sort of siphoning off a large chunk of my money towards something else. So at first I was pulling out a lot of money and using it towards debt. And once that was done, then I took that money and I put it towards rent. So, like I said, it's not forever, guys. You're eventually going to be able to move out, or you're going to be able to have a place of your own, or you're going to be able to do your own thing. But in the meantime, if you want to be serious about that debt, guys, and not being a slave to the lender, you have to make paying that debt a priority, and you have to take it seriously. I know that's easier said than done. We all like to have fun. We all like to go out. Again, we all like to live somewhere fun and on our own, but it's temporary. That's the best thing I could tell you. Even in those seasons where you're actually paying the debt and you're like, this is not fun. I would rather be doing something else. I would rather be living somewhere else. It's just temporary. And that momentary sacrifice is so worth it. So that's my encouragement for you today. That's my story of how I got out of debt, you guys. It really was that simple by the grace of God. Even after a 2.5 year delay with no job, God showed up. He met me there and he allowed me to just knock it all out in a few years. I will be making another video that talks more about how I stay out of debt. Things are getting expensive. Inflation and cost of living is just going up, up, up. So it doesn't end with getting out of debt. We also then have to focus on staying out of debt. It starts with budgeting, okay? There's your hint. It starts with budgeting, okay? So I hope this was helpful to you. Thank you so much for joining me on this finance series. I look forward to sharing more with you. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I'd love to help. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Bye. All right. So, as I mentioned, I graduated school with no job prospects, or I should say, no good job prospects. So, I worked a lot of odd jobs after school. I even went back to a junior college after graduating with the bachelor's degree from a 4 year university. I did all kind of things to both keep myself busy and also try to keep myself sharp and ready for the day God would open the door for me to get that job that I was desperately asking for and praying for. So, I want to start us off with a verse just to talk a little bit more about debt, what the Bible says about debt, and hopefully it encourages you on this journey for you to get out of debt yourself.